We are XYZ Consulting, and we are here to discuss our analysis of Jenny Cycling's components. JCC is a Tier 1 supplier to an OEM and operates with a multi-tier supply chain. So I'm going to take you through the agenda today. First, we're going to start with the OEM multiple tier supply structure, then move on to the JCC supply chain and the changing financial impacts, and then the pro forma income statement for JCC and suggestions that we have for JCC. So first, there are several reasons an OEM would choose to utilize several tiers of suppliers. The biggest one, and perhaps the most obvious, is that it reduces fixed costs such as machinery. It could increase variable costs, however, which negatively affects the contribution margin. But the OEM no longer has to worry about the production of every part of their product, and in some cases does not have to invest in expensive components such as machinery. As demonstrated in this case, the OEM was free from having to invest in the machine to ensure the stability of the chassis part. Instead, their top-tier supplier, JCC, incurred this expense. The OEM also has benefits from cost savings due to large volume discounts that they can demand from their suppliers. This is beneficial at first, but may be a less effective tactic in the long run. Using multiple tiers also has the potential to reduce production risks due to the establishment of multiple subsystems, even within each level of their suppliers. And with more subsystems, the risks inherent to production can be diversified away.
While there are many advantages associated with the tier structure, it has led to problems of quality, control, and communication for the OEM. Because the OEM has multiple product variants, it is exposed to high quality risk. For example, if parts come in at the wrong level of quality, the entire finished product can be affected and thus lead to a delay in the supply chain. The OEM should work to improve its total quality management, which is a necessary program in achieving a profitable and strong process. This can decrease return and repair costs and increase the efficiency of its process. A multiple tier structure also weakens the OEM's control of its process because they rely heavily on their first tier suppliers. Responsibility is handed over to outside suppliers, with the total cost of ownership becoming invisible to the OEM and difficult to leverage. The tier structure creates a large distance between the OEM and its lower tiers, thus creating a disconnect in communication throughout the system. Because the lower tiers are the closest to the market, the OEM has less access to demand fluctuations. It is important that the OEM is well integrated and it can adjust its processes as quickly as possible to meet market changes.
Since JCC is the only one within the supply chain that uses lean, it makes an incomplete and inefficient system. JCC carries minimal parts and uses just-in-time delivery, which its suppliers and the OEM do not use. JCC is not able to quickly meet demand by the OEM due to the lack of communication and use of just-in-time. JCC's cycle times by process can be seen on this graph. The higher the bar, as seen here in welding, the longer it takes to push the chassis through. Welding is the bottleneck of the process. JCC should resolve these issues by increasing capacity by adding additional slower operating machines.
JCC has many costs to consider when making decisions to meet increasing demands required by the OEM. Issues concerning delivery times and the low quality of parts could result in lower profit margins for the suppliers. As mentioned before, the OEM is charging $2,000 for each minute of lost production time, which would create huge losses for JCC if changes are not made. Additionally, there have been bottlenecks in the production process that are slowing production and wasting money due to the lag time between the steps of production. JCC invested in a wheel balancing machine that tests each set before installing it on its chassis in hopes of increasing capacity. Not only did the OEM state that it is unwilling to pay more for such changes, it is demanding a discounted selling price. Having to lower prices for the OEM caused reduced profit margins for the suppliers. As a result, JCC has become the target of blame in the minds of stockholders for these decreased earnings, which could potentially give JCC a bad reputation and prevent suppliers from working with them in the future. If JCC was to try and increase their production of the chassis by adding additional machines to the system, it would require more labor to operate these machines. As JCC is currently operating at capacity, overtime hours will be needed, and the cost of overtime was determined to be 150% of original labor costs, or $75 per hour. Lowering the selling price and having higher variable costs due to increased direct labor costs would greatly diminish the contribution margin per unit due to a higher cost basis. Similarly, manufacturing costs would likely increase when trying to meet demand, which would increase the cost to the distributors. However, JCC's use of lean manufacturing allows more efficient operating processes. Although some overtime may be required, the use of lean manufacturing allows companies to increase productivity at the same labor costs, which would ultimately lower costs and increase the contribution margin.
For increased production and price concessions. The impact of these demands on JCC's financial performance can be clearly seen in its pro forma income statement for 2015. Sales as a whole are expected to increase by $7,125,000, but that is purely due to the increased demand, as sales per unit have decreased by $200. Because production is increased beyond capacity, overtime hours will be needed to meet demand. Overtime hours will be paid at $75 per hour, which is 150% of the current labor cost of $50 per hour. There is not expected to be any changes with respect to variable materials overhead or standard labor costs in 2015. So the projected increase in cost of goods sold is purely the result of the increased production and overtime costs. JCC can produce 30,000 units a year when operating at capacity. So the amount of overtime hours that will be needed in 2015 is the time it will take to produce the extra 3,750 units demanded by the OEM. More than one unit can be in the process at a time, so the number of overtime hours needed in 2015 is simply the time between units entering the process multiplied by the units in excess of capacity multiplied by the number of workers. So JCC can produce 30,000 units a year at capacity, which is then divided by 50 productive work weeks per year and 40 hours per work week, which means they can produce 15 units per hour. In order to produce 15 units per hour, a unit must be entered into the process every 4 minutes. 4 minutes by 4 workers by 3,750 additional units is 60,000 overtime minutes, or 1,000 overtime hours needed for 2015. So, JCC is expected to incur $75,000 of overtime costs in 2015, which, when divided by the 3,750 units, comes to $20 per unit. Materials and overhead costs per unit are not expected to change in 2015, so the sum of materials, overhead, and overtime costs per unit is multiplied by 3,750 to reach the $10,153,125 increase in cost of goods sold. Net income is expected to be $5,763,297 in 2015, a decrease of $2,690,928 from 2014. The difference is a result of the increased expenses and decreased selling price. The OEM's demands for increased production and price concessions are negatively affecting JCC's financial position. For JCC to improve, changes must be made either operationally or communicatively between JCC and the OEM.
Workers or machinery, and put more focus on their value stream. We recommend that JCC restructure their supply chain to build better relationships with the suppliers. A tighter relationship can yield many great results and is more effective at maintaining and fostering innovation than in a competitive playing field of bidding. The suppliers could open sites closer to the OEM, which could increase and strengthen their relationship, as well as reduce freight costs and transportation time. JCC may also consider additional workers to help reduce throughput time and facilitate the increase in demand for motorcycles by their OEM. Implementing just-in-time manufacturing throughout the whole supply chain would also ensure the implementation of takt time. It benefits the company by helping it establish a steady and continuous flow of production and eliminate unnecessary waste from overproduction by producing directly to actual customer demand. This will improve quality and efficiency for JCC.
A value stream map could also be created by JCC in order to evaluate how value flows through their processes. An example of the map for JCC is shown here. There are many benefits for doing a value stream. First, it is a leadership-heavy activity which allows top levels of management to work together in order to get consensus early on, ensuring that the processes are not scrambled and disorganized. It is a visual unification and a simplification tool that breaks down the processes displays it in a practical means to drive continuous improvement. And lastly, it is also a very effective way to orient new hires, allowing them to fully understand the business and how it runs.
That concludes our analysis of JCC. Thank you for listening.